Conformity, changing behaviour to go along with a group, and this is social influence. Sheriff, he created an experiment putting a dot on a screen. It appeared to move, however, the dot was not actually moving. He sat someone down at a table and made them say how far they thought the dot had moved. These guesses were in a range of even the closest being 20 centimetres to the furthest away being 80 centimetres. And phase 2 brought a different dynamic with people guess groups of 3. This found a more common estimate until phase 3 where people went back to guessing individually. However, now people were closer to the common estimate because people look for guidance in ambiguous situations, and this is called informational conformity. This brings a subjective feel as it's open to interpretation. Continuing on with informational social influence, we see that estimates converged and a group norm was formed because participants were influenced by other participants' estimates. This basically means that a group collective view influenced the individual guesses. So we have to look at the variables in experiments. So these variables were controlled in a lab. The third variable shouldn't have influenced results because of this, and the method was replicable due to the control. Then we move on to deception. Participants believed that the light definitely was moving. Narrow sample, only males participated in the experiment, and artificially it was a low ecological validity because this doesn't get done in everyday life. Rotter of 1966 now, he created a 13-part questionnaire to measure internal and external locus of control. This brought a score obviously of 0 to 13, which let you see if you had an internal or external, because low indicates an internal control, while high score indicates an external control. What is locus of control? Well, it is the extent to which people think they are in control of their own lives. An external locus of control is the belief that things happen because of luck, fate, or other external forces beyond the control of the individual. This comes into the basis with religion and things like that. Then you look at internal locus of control, which is the belief that things happen as a result of our choices and decisions. This is more the control setting for atheists or people in the science industry. The case study of Spectre from 1983 saw that the high external locus of control conformed more than those with low external locus of control. Neither high or low external locus of control conformed in situations of informational social influence, and we don't need to be accepted into a social group which increases our ability to resist social influence. Moghaddam, 1998, found that Japanese people conform more easily than Americans and have a more external locus of control. We can also look at cultural differences and how this impacts and influences conformity rates. And Holden Blass, 1967 and 1991, saw that people with internal locus of control were better at resisting obedience than the external counterparts. Now, internal locus of control people are more able to resist if they are forced or when they suspect manipulation. And Schertz in 1985 found there was no actual correlation between locus of control and obedience. Moving into the realm of minority influence, where conversion is a type of internalisation to see the majority gradually adopt a new idea or belief. Cryptomnesia, a minority attitudes becoming majority to hold the views. A memory error where a new belief takes form without a conscious actual understanding of where it came from. And Van Avermaet called this the snowball effect. And then we looked at consistency, keeping the same opinion. And you got commitment, sticking with the belief. Flexibility, moderate, cooperative and reasonable. Systematic, minority considered over time. Superficial processing, analysing on the surface level. Thinking style, complying with for and against. Identification, minority can hold with majority. And we can see this in the homosexuals arguing for homosexual rights is actually harder than a heterosexual person arguing for homosexual rights. This famous woman right here was the definition of social change with innovation and low disruptive impacts. Obviously, social change refers to the way society develops in attitudes and behaviours. And in situations like this, where new ideas can be tested, it may be a slow process. But making things like 3D printed steaks in a laboratory may be better for the future. However, it will be a slow process. Looking at the social change, where once social change takes place, conformity can consolidate. And if you look at things like the Green Space Act in the 1970s, people really took over with Greta Thunberg and eco-activists. Leighton and Wolff saw social impact theory in 1981, where strength, how powerful the pressurizer is, immediacy, how soon the pressure is, and numbers, the size of the pressure. I try to remember this as SIN, S-I-N, strength, immediacy, numbers. It is a sin to kill a wolf. Continuing with social impact theory, Sedkades and Jackson of 1990 saw that this experiment backed up findings, and Mullen in 1985 criticised many for focusing on self-reporting instead of observable behaviour. So what is self-reporting? Well, it's a research method where participants provide information about themselves, such as their thoughts, feelings or behaviours, through questionnaires, interviews or other means. Minority influence by Moskovich et al. Of 1969, and this saw the study of inconsistent behavioural styles based on colour. This was a lab experiment where 192 female participants were split into groups of 6, and this brought 2 confederates, with one group was a control with no confederates. And groups were asked to identify the colour of 36 slides, where all slides were blue. The consistent confederates identified all 36 slides as green, and the inconsistent confederates identified 12 slides as blue and the other 24 as green. Groups with consistent confederates, 32% of natural participants identified at least one slide as green, with around 8% of the time people identified slides as green. In the control group, around 0.25% of the time, participants identified them as green. However, if you look at the group with inconsistent confederates, 1% of people identified slides as green. And minority groups had more influence when they behaved consistently rather than inconsistently. There are pros to the experiment and the actual control, where minority groups had influence. And the cons, if you look at the low ecological validity and low generalisability, as there was only female participants. Additionally, if you look at other experiments, colours weren't actually announced and they were written down. More people adopting a minority view when things were written down, which backs theory on minority influence. And then if you look at Nemeth et al., a version of Moscovitz's experiment. However, people were allowed to answer with a combination of colours rather than just one colour. 2 confederates identified every slide as green, and confederates identified darker slides as green and brighter slides as greeny blue. Inconsistent confederates' behaviour did not influence participants, and confederates who identified darker and brighter slides as green and green-blue respectively had a significant influence on participants. Strict consistency was not effective. Combos were more effective.